As you all probably know, I am British, but there is massive news coming out of the US this weekend, and I am of course talking about the NFL Draft Combine, because what else is going on in the world that is more important than this? Hey guys, welcome back to my channel, or if you are new here, then please do me a favour and hit that subscribe button. So, quite a lot going on in the world at the minute. In honours of Sod's Law, I of course have the flu, because why wouldn't I? So not entirely sure how long I can get through this without coughing my guts up or snot running down my face. But don't worry guys, I will make sure to edit out any of that if that is the case, because I don't want to put anyone through seeing that. But as I said in the start, there is, of course, some massive news going on. No, not that news. The NFL Draft Combine is currently ongoing in Indianapolis. It's always a weird... I don't really know why they have it just before free agency, because we have the Combine and then we go, oh, actually, hold on, let me just pause all of the draft stuff. Let me go into free agency, deal with that. Okay, now let's bring it all back for the draft and talk about that stuff again. But that's just the way that they have it. Obviously, you know, in terms of the prospects, stuff like that, who the Browns have met with, who obviously the Browns are looking at, etc., etc. I'll kind of rope all of that into a future video as we kind of talk about the actual prospects themselves. In this video, I just kind of wanted to talk about the news that is coming out of the Browns brass that are down in Indianapolis for the Combine, what we're hearing, what rumours, and obviously what we've heard directly from Andrew Berry and new head coach Todd Monken. So I'll keep this one fairly quick. As I said, there's actually not been that much to talk about, shall we say. It's mostly just kind of the rumour mill at the minute. But I do, as I mentioned, want to touch on what Andrew Berry and Todd Monken had said. But to start with, the two biggest rumours that I think, you know, have come out of the last few days from everyone that is down in Indianapolis, what they are hearing, etc., etc. And I think that probably starts with the idea of the Browns trading back, which I will touch on because obviously AB did mention it. But, you know, I think with, you know, we already knew that where the Browns were, the chances, you know, picking at 6, the chances are BPA, best player available, it's going to be a defensive guy. And, you know, the Browns, everyone associated with the Browns would be pretty up in arms if they drafted a defensive guy. But of course, we've seen, you know, last year, that's kind of the route that they went with, the best player available kind of route. So I think the idea of a trade back is being talked about mainly, you know, partly because of that, and obviously with how the Browns traded back last year. But, you know, you're in the Browns position where, you know, they need offensive linemen, they need wide receivers, they need weapons on offense. If you're sat there at 6 and, you know, we've just seen Sonny Styles, Arvell Reese, these guys absolutely light up their testing at the Combine. You know, guys that have great tape, now have great athletic testing to go along with it. These are going to be guys that are in demand. Chances are one of them is going to be there at 6 when the Browns are picking. So, you know, is any team willing to come up for one of these guys? That's, of course, going to be the discussion. I've seen a trade idea floated around with the Cowboys about them coming up and giving you 12 and 20, which I probably would be inclined to take. But as I said, I think there's going to be, you know, nothing's a guarantee. It takes 2 to tango. I've said this many times. It doesn't matter how much you want to trade back. If no one wants to trade up, you can't do it. But I do just, you know, as I said, nothing's a guarantee. It's not a certainty. But I do think with how it's looking like the board is going to shape up, I would be personally pretty surprised if the Browns don't try and entertain that trade back. Because as I said, they're going to be there at 6, and there is going to be a very, very good defensive player available on the board, whether that's Sonny Styles, whether that's Arvell Reese, whether that's Caleb Downs. By the way, how the fuck did Ohio State not win the national championship this year with all of these absolute freaks of nature on their team? I will never know. But there's, you know, one of those guys is going to be available. So I think trade back, you know, we can all talk about the idea of it. We can all kind of talk about that stuff. But I think as we get closer to the draft, it is going to become, less rumor stuff and more something that we, are pretty certain is going to happen. But, never take what Andrew Berry says about this stuff seriously. We all remember last year, he does like to, throw smoke screens out there. So who knows? Maybe they just sit there at 6 and take Sonny Styles or Caleb Downs. You never know. But that's probably one of the biggest rumours. And then the other rumour is about a trade for a wide receiver, the wide receiver being Marvin Harrison Jr. Now, we got a lot of buzz at this yesterday. Don't get me wrong, I would be absolutely all over this. Everyone knows my thoughts on him that listen to any of my draft stuff from that year. I don't think that he has had, he hasn't even remotely been tapped into as a player and what he can do. I feel like, don't get me wrong, some of it his own doing, but I think his time in Arizona has been kind of marred by, bad coaching, bad decisions from the top, bad quarterback play, and has not really been able to show the full potential of why he got drafted 4th overall. Now, what would it cost? Would I do it for a first-round pick? Probably not. I say probably not. I could be tempted into it if it was 24. But I think, with how these kind of trades happen historically, I would be surprised if it was a first-round pick. I'd happily do it for a second. If it's a third or a fourth, if it's a third and a fourth, send them over now. Send all of the thirds and the fourths over. But I think this is something that... I think it's unlikely. I will be surprised if the Browns are able to get Marvin Harrison Jr. just because of the comments we heard from the GM talking about him. He was praising him up, etc., etc. Are you really going to give up on a wide receiver prospect that, potential coming into the league was that high? Are you going to give up on that already? I don't really know. What are they going to do with Kyler, etc., etc.? So don't get me wrong. I would be surprised, but I do think I don't think it's something that's out of the realm of possibility, and I do think it's something that could continue to be monitored over the coming weeks before we enter the draft. Maybe Arizona go, fuck it, let's blow it all up, let's get as many picks as we can, whether that's for Kyler, Marvin Harrison, who knows. But that's kind of the two biggest rumours that we've kind of heard around the team. Now, moving on to what we've heard from Andrew Berry and Todd Monken. I'll start with Andrew Berry because I'll be completely honest, we didn't really get anything out of Todd Monken. Everyone was kind of, we're so happy for Kevin Stefanski to leave because I'm so sick of, these press conferences and these interviews where he says a lot but doesn't actually say anything. Todd Monken has pretty much followed that script because his interviews over this week, he has literally given us nothing. He is basically just giving us buzzwords and talking points. But we'll get into that. As I said, I want to start with Andrew Berry and some of the stuff that he talked about. So starting with free agency, Andrew Berry did say that they have a chance to be more aggressive in free agency this year. But of course, they still want to remain a young team. And that kind of reinforces, I suppose, the outlook that I had on how I think this team will attack free agency and the draft. As I said, more aggressive, maybe. It's not hard to be more aggressive than they've been the last couple of years, just because they haven't really been that involved in free agency the last couple of years. Last year we got Malik Collins and a couple of backup offensive linemen. They're not exactly, the biggest spenders in free agency, and I'm not saying that's a bad thing by any means. If you're someone like me, I don't believe that any team should, put their priority of roster building on free agency. No great team has ever built that great team through free agency. Free agency is about adding tools to your arsenal more so than it is building the arsenal. But as I said, it kind of reinforces my outlook because whilst I can say all of that, and I don't want them to go and spend loads and loads and all of their money in free agency, I do think that they are going to try and bring in, at least one or two starters on this offense in free agency, and in particular, the offensive line. I think the way that I'm thinking and how I think they should operate, I go and get someone in free agency that, is a week one starter, is paid to be a week one starter, not one of these, let's bring someone in on a veteran minimums contract, and if they surprise us and end up being a starting left tackle, then that's great. No, we need to bring someone in to solidify this offensive line, because I don't want a line full of rookies. As much as I want rookies and I want them to draft offensive linemen high, I don't want an entire line full of rookies. So, whether that's Linderbaum on the interior, whether that's completely blanking on his name now from Green Bay, at the tackle position, Rasheed Walker, I would be on board with bringing in a bona fide starter. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm not going to overpay for a Rasheed Walker. I would overpay for a Tyler Linderbaum, but not a Rasheed Walker. But I do believe that they should bring in someone that is a bona fide starter, just to have as that kind of base level before you go into the draft. You don't want to go into the draft trying, to find your franchise left tackle, left guard, right guard, and maybe centre. Let's get one of those positions at least figured out in free agency, and I think that is what they will do in how they attack free agency and the draft. So as I said, AB talking about me being more aggressive in free agency. I don't think that means that they're going to go and spend 100 million in free agency and they're going to go and spend all of their money. But I do think we could see, not more signings, but signings that are actually made with the intention of, this is a legitimate starter. This is someone we are signing to come and be our left tackle or to come and be our centre, versus we've brought, 3 guys in from someone's practice squad that maybe one of them can be the centre or something. I think that's how they will go. In regards to the draft, he did, as I kind of touched on, AB acknowledged that, they are absolutely open to trading down from 6. I don't think that is a surprise to anyone. But as I said, he does love the smoke screen, Andrew Berry. So, are they actually, completely open to trading back from 6, or is it all smoke and mirrors? I mean, absolutely, yes, they would trade back. So I don't think that's even a question. I think even in the season, before we even knew if it would be the 6th pick, we knew that any top 10 pick had the potential of being traded back. So 100% he is telling the truth there in regards to them being completely open to a trade back. But it is still a bit of both. He will make comments to try and throw some people off, to try and cause some smoke, etc., etc. But as I said, absolutely 100% we are going to be open to trading back from number 6. In regards to the offensive line, Andrew Berry went out of his way to say that the Chicago Bears offered a good model last offseason to improve the offensive line. That was one of the worst offensive lines in the NFL, and through internal development, a couple of veteran additions and some additions through the draft, they were able to completely overhaul that offensive line. And don't get me wrong, not the best offensive line we've ever seen, but a much, much, much better offensive line than what we saw from the year before, and kind of shows you how, that is a possibility. You can go from having one of the worst offensive lines to having a better offensive line and a top half of the NFL offensive line. It's not as big of and a daunting of a task as maybe it appears to anyone that doesn't have that added context. That kind of plays into what I just said about the free agency and the draft. Veteran additions as well as additions through the draft. I expect the Browns, as I just said, to make a couple of veteran additions that guys that are intended to be starters. As I said, not just random guys of practice squads that maybe can work out. And obviously with the draft as well, I expect one of those first round picks, if not both, to be used on offensive line. And then in regards to the internal development, that's of course to do with the guys that are already here. Luke Whippler, obviously, hopefully can be the starting centre, continue his development. He has shown good flashes in the past. What happens with DeJuan Jones? I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm certainly not banking on it. But is he able to overcome everything we've kind of seen the last couple of years? And even a Tevin Jenkins, who, yes, is technically a free agent, but a guy that was in the building last year, if anything, outplayed Wyatt Teller when he came in, someone that I definitely expect to be re-signed. So those guys kind of are included in that internal development aspect of it. And then, as I said, with the veteran additions through free agency and what you do in the draft. So, it's a big task for the Browns, but as Andrew Berry pointed to with the Bears, and as we've seen even with the Patriots in recent years, I mean they took the worst tackle that you could have took at that spot in terms of at number 4 in Will Campbell, and they still turned their offensive line around. So you don't even need to get the best tackle for it to work. But yeah, it's a daunting task. It's a big task. Is it 100% going to be fixed? Probably not. But I do think that they could make good ground towards, completely overhauling this offensive line, something that a lot of people maybe thought was completely out of the realm of possibility. I think it is more possible than maybe people initially thought. In regards to the quarterbacks, so this was a trend with both Andrew Berry and Todd Monken. Berry wouldn't commit to Shedeur or Watson being the week 1 starters, which he shouldn't. None of those guys have done anything in recent time at the Browns to be given the starting job in February. I would be very annoyed if that was the case. So I think that is absolutely the right thing you should be saying. And obviously did touch on, that bringing in external competition is certainly a possibility. Now, I will give my thoughts on the quarterback position in a full video within a week or so. But, as I kind of said there, I'm fully on board with not naming one of these guys that don't deserve to be named the starter in February. Don't get me wrong. I think Shedeur absolutely deserves a chance to compete for this job. He has earned that right, but I don't, from what I saw last season is no way near enough for me to say, yep, that's it. That's our starter. Name him the starter in February and don't even worry about bringing in competition or whatever. I've said this before. I'm not even convinced that anyone currently in that room beats out a healthy Deshaun Watson. And that's not me saying that because I want Deshaun Watson to play by any means. But, I think, and I've kind of touched on this before, but with Deshaun Watson, the biggest problem with his play in Cleveland for me has been his head. His head is officially cooked. That man can't probably play in the NFL with that head. He just can't see it anymore. I think his confidence is completely shot. I just don't think he has the headspace to be able to play quarterback in the NFL anymore. But one thing I don't think he has lost is talent. In the end of the day, you don't just forget how to throw a fucking football. That is something that if you can do, you're pretty good at. I haven't played competitive 11-a-side football for 8 years, and I can still throw a football pretty fucking far. I can still kick a ball pretty fucking far and just as well as I could when I was playing. So you don't just lose that. And, if anyone remembers the first training camp with Deshaun Watson where the Browns came away thinking that they had just watched prime Peyton Manning. He's going to look good in shorts. He's not good. Don't get me wrong. This is not me, again, trying to make any arguments for Deshaun Watson. I don't want to see him play for this team. But if it's a competition in shorts and just throwing a football, he's probably going to win against those other guys. That's why I am fully on board with bringing in external competition, because I don't want it to get to that point. And that's why I think, all of this kind of talk with not committing to anyone currently in that room and mentioning that, external competition is certainly a route that they could go down. I'm completely on board with that and completely happy with that because that aligns with my view on this quarterback room currently. You're in regards to Shedeur as well. AB said that he wants the biggest thing he wants to see from Shedeur in year 2 is playing more efficiently and not putting the ball in harm's way, whilst also maintaining his ability to produce out of structure and generate explosive plays. And the thing is, he noted it as well, and it's the first thing I thought when he said that, and it's like, well, we aren't really going to see any of that in OTAs or training camp. So in regards to what they have as a bar for where they want to see Shedeur improve, we're not really going to see that unless he's on the field playing. So, as I said, not against Shedeur competing for the job. If he competes for the job and wins the job, he deserves to have the job completely. But any talk about this kind of, what we want to see from him, well, that's all well and good, but we have to actually see him on the field if that's the case. And obviously, we'll have to find out if we do see him on the field. And then finally, on the quarterbacks, the forgotten quarterback, he did say that, Dylan might have been forgotten externally, but he hasn't been forgotten internally, which is actually a fucking wild thing to say. I don't think I've ever heard anyone even talk about a player like that before, let alone a quarterback. Said he has a bright future in the NFL at least, but I do feel kind of bad for Dylan Gabriel, how he's kind of just been completely put on the back bench and no one even cares what he's doing now. Can he prove people wrong? We'll have to wait and see. But that's the quarterbacks, as I said. They're open to competition, and I think we'll be looking externally to see if they can bring in more competition into that room. But as I said, I'll do a full video on the quarterback room, my thoughts, who I think they should bring in, because there is one particular quarterback that I would very, very be on board with bringing in as competition that I will get into in a video over the next week. And then just some of the injuries and retirement stuff as well that was touched on. Joel Bitonio is still making his decision, but of course would be welcome back with open arms. That's from both Todd Monken and Andrew Berry. So hopefully Joel can get himself pumped up for at least one more year, because I'd just love to see Joel Bitonio carry on playing football. This is a guy that graded out as I think the 10th best left guard in the NFL this year, so it's not like his play has taken a nosedive by any means. He's still a more than competent guard in the NFL, more competent than any guards we've had on this roster currently. So that would be a good thing anyway. And then B, it would help the Browns out financially. So him deciding to come back for a year, then being able to extend that contract and kind of move that money around will be beneficial to the Browns' salary cap and their finances. So completely on board with Joel Bitonio coming back, and hopefully we get a decision on whether that is the case or not the case regardless, sooner rather than later. In more sorrow news, shall we say, we got the report last week about it's pretty unlikely that JOK will ever play football again, something I kind of already knew. Have done videos on this channel. Andrew Berry was asked about it, and did say that he was not overly optimistic about JOK resuming his career. So that is a very, very sad thing to think about. But I wanted to do a video when the initial report came out, and then I kind of thought, well, no, I until this is official, I don't think I should be talking about it in that kind of sense. Don't get me wrong, as I said, this is what I expected. I didn't expect JOK to ever play again with kind of how it was talked about and what we heard about last year. But I think just to give him that grace and not do the kind of premature digging of graves, I will just wait until that is actually official before I do a video on that, because, as I said, I think it would be unfair to just do a throwaway comment about it. He deserves a whole video for any of that stuff. But B, and just be a little bit more respectful for the decision that is, in the end of the day, his decision, not anyone else's decision, not Mary Kay's decision, not anyone that's reporting on decision. It's his decision, and until I hear that from him, I'm not going to do a full video on it. Quinshawn Junkins, good news, out of a boot and will be good to go for training camp. So fantastic news. When that injury happened, we thought, well, shit, we might be in the market for another running back again. Don't get me wrong, I expect them to add maybe one or two depth pieces to that room. But in terms of the main two guys, Judkins and Sampson, I expect to be, pretty much in that position, and I think that's what Todd Monken will be thinking as well. And then finally, DeJuan Jones, he said that he expects to be back for OTAs. AB didn't actually confirm that, but he did say that the rehab is right on track. So hopefully we can get him back for training camp. And as I said, I'm not banking on DeJuan Jones, turning this around and being a solidified starter at either of those tackle positions. But any increased likelihood of that happening, obviously, the better. I said finally, I've actually got a couple more, my bad. Luke Whippler will be good to go, so that's good. As I said earlier, probably going to be our starting centre this year, so the earlier that he can get into OTAs, into training camp, the better. And then, actually, finally, Martin Emerson, obviously, the torn Achilles last year in a contract year. And AB did actually say that his future is unsettled and that they have to figure things out, which, read the tea leaves, probably sounds like they're not going to bring him back unless it is, very, very cheap for them. Maybe Tyson Campbell came in and stole his spot. Obviously, we'll have to wait and see what happens with Martin Emerson, but would be a shame, of course, for his career to end in Cleveland the way it did, with obviously how well he has played here. But as I said, I think the play from Tyson Campbell, I expect them to make 1 or 2 additions to that secondary, whether that's through free agency or the draft. I can see how he can kind of be surplus of value in their thinking, and unless they can bring him back very cheap, I think that's probably unlikely. So that was AB. And then, as I said, just to quickly touch on some of Todd Monken's thing, but as I said, he literally told us nothing, so this will probably take 2 minutes. But, from the quarterbacks, again, Shedeur Sanders has what it takes to be quarterback one, but we have to see all of this stuff. Again, just the Kevin Stefanski book of telling us something without actually telling us anything. I think we all know that Shedeur is going to be competing for the job, so not really news there. Same with Deshaun Watson. He spoke about Deshaun and how, players that have played at an elite level, you always believe that you can tap back into that. I don't believe that, but let's wait and see. But, as I said earlier, if the room stays as it is, I won't be shocked if Deshaun Watson wins that job. And, Monken did talk about how they will have a quarterback competition this offseason. Andrew Berry spoke about it as well, as I mentioned. So, anyone that thinks that this is Shedeur's job or Deshaun Watson's job, whatever, that's not the case. They are going to have a quarterback competition, and I believe that they will bring in a external player to come in to be a part of that competition. Because, as I said, if it's a competition between the guys that are there, I'm not so sure that Deshaun Watson doesn't win it. He did also say that the only coaching hire they have left to make is assistant D-line coach. Hopefully they make a better hire for their assistant D-line coach that Kevin Stefanski just made in Atlanta. But that's the last one that they have to make, and then the entire coaching staff will be filled. So, I think some of us were maybe worried that because they had left it so late with the head coach hire, they were going to be a bit behind these position coaches and coordinator positions, but they've seemed to pretty much get all of that filled, in the time that they need to. So shouldn't be any concerns there. And then finally, as I mentioned, Joel Bitonio is still mulling over his decision, and Todd Monken has said that he has essentially begged him to come back. He has tried talking him back into it. Didn't get a decision in the building when he spoke to him, but said, it could certainly be the case. So that's everything that we've heard directly from Todd Monken, directly from Andrew Berry. That's the kind of rumour stuff that we've heard. As I said, there is obviously a combine going on. There's actually prospects and players currently, doing these drills and doing this athletic testing. And I will talk about that in a video in the coming days. Obviously, today we've got wide receivers. Massive, obviously, position of interest for the Cleveland Browns. We've got quarterbacks. Is Ty Simpson going to be on their radar? Does he test really well that people think, oh, maybe I should draft him now? We should never ever look at quarterback testing to judge a quarterback. But then obviously tomorrow, the big one, the offensive line, which, again, receiver is big, but I think the offensive line class at the Combine tomorrow is going to be where the most interest is from the Cleveland Browns. It's certainly where the most interest is going to be from me. So, as I said, we'll do a video in the coming days talking kind of all about the prospect stuff. But in this one, just wanted to give my thoughts on the actual Browns news and what we've heard from the Browns brass down in Indianapolis. So that will do it for me today, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know your guys' thoughts in the comments. Do you think that it's all smoke screens from Andrew Berry? Is he actually giving us any information there? Are you annoyed that Todd Monken has given us nothing like Kevin Stefanski used to do? Let me know your thoughts on all of the Browns rumours from Indianapolis at the Combine in the comments. But as I said, that will do it for me. If you do enjoy my content, guys, please do me a favour. hit that subscribe button, hit the like button. It's free, but it really, really helps out my channel. You can also check the links in the description to see where you can follow and interact with me on social media. As I always say, I'm trying to build a community of Cleveland Browns fans, and even if that means I only get to talk to one fan a day, I'm happy because I'm talking Browns football with the best fan base in the world. Thanks again for watching, guys. Have an amazing weekend. Stay safe out there with everything that's going on in the world at the minute. But most importantly, go Browns.